The sun fell slow across the dry Wyoming plains, slanting through clouds like God's tired eyes, watching a world that kept choosing silence over justice. The cattle dust rose in sighs around the fence line, and every evening, just past supper, Elijah Hart rode his horse past the Buckner Ranch. He never said why he did. He claimed he liked the longer route home. Claimed the wind there smelled less like manure and more like memories. But deep down, it was her, Marlena Buckner, the widow in the red barn. She wasn't born a Buckner. No. Marlena had once been Marlena Roan, daughter of a preacher, voice like rain, hands like prayer. She'd married into the Buckner name at 19, just before her father took ill and died, just before her mama lost the farm gambling on seed that never sprouted. Marlena married Amos Buckner because she had no one left, and Amos had acres and a quiet sort of smile that made her believe she could be safe. But Amos died 2 years later in a cattle stampede no one quite believed. And after he was buried, hastily, with the kind of wooden cross you wouldn't lean a hat on, his family changed toward her like milk gone sour. Now she lived in the small red barn out back. Not the main house. That was for kin. No, they let her stay because of the deed Amos never signed, and the suspicion that somewhere, tucked in one of her drawers, was a will she refused to show. Because it left something to her. Because it dared to call her wife. They couldn't kill her, no. But they could break her in pieces slow enough the law wouldn't notice. Elijah saw it each time he passed. The way she limped some days. The way bruises bloomed like dark berries on her wrists, and how she tried to hide them with gloves even in July. The way her son, yes, Amos had left her one thing worth keeping, never looked up when strangers passed. Little Jesse was 5, and already quiet like the grave. Elijah had buried his own wife 6 winters ago. She died birthing twins who never saw light, and since then he'd worked sunup to sundown trying to feel something again. But only Marlena made his hands shake when they met hers. Only Marlena made his chest burn like the old hymns still meant something. One Sunday, while riding back from selling feed, he saw her in town. She wore her church dress, the one with faded blue flowers at the hem, and she was begging the pharmacist for a salve. Her eye was swollen, her knuckles raw. "I fell," she said, her voice soft and far away. "You need a doctor," Elijah said gently, stepping between her and the glares of those pretending not to notice. "I need quiet, and to get home before Hank Buckner finds." I left. He stared at her a long moment. "I could take you." She blinked up at him, wary, then nodded once. The ride back was quiet. Jessie sat between them, clinging to her side. Elijah didn't ask questions. She didn't offer answers. But when she dismounted, she looked back and whispered, "Thank you. Don't come again. They'll think something." He did come again. Not that week. Not the next. But 3 weeks later, when the frost had its first bite, Elijah rode out with a bag of apples and left it at her barn door. He didn't knock. He didn't wait. But the next morning, the same bag returned to his porch, filled with warm corn muffins wrapped in a dish towel that smelled like her hair used to before the bruises. It became a silent thing. A private thing. One night just before snowfall, he heard the screaming from the ridge. It was Marlena. He rode down like the devil himself had cut his reins, and when he reached the barn, he found Hank Buckner drunk, dragging Marlena by her. Hair across the dirt. Little Jesse was screaming. Another brother stood nearby, Clay, smoking like it was just another chore. Elijah didn't think. His rifle came down fast and sharp across Hank's jaw. Clay pulled a knife, but Elijah fired a warning shot into the dirt, and they backed off. "You touch her again," Elijah growled, "and I'll bury you where your mama won't find you." Marlena was sobbing, face streaked in blood and dirt, lips trembling. But she reached for Jesse before she reached for Elijah. That part stayed with him. Elijah rode home with them that night. His ranch was quiet, lonely, but it was safe. Marlena didn't speak for 2 days. On the 3rd day, she asked, "Why?" He looked out the window. "Because someone should have years ago." "You don't owe me anything." "I don't," he said, "but maybe I want to." She watched him, her fingers curled around the mug of coffee he'd made. Then quietly, she said, "They'll come looking, and if they do, they won't be kind." Elijah nodded. "Then we don't wait for them." And just like that, she understood. He wasn't offering pity, he was offering her his name. But just as she let the warmth of that possibility sink into her bones for the first time in years, a knock came at the door. 3 hard knocks. Elijah opened it slow, rifle in hand, and there stood Sheriff Dobbins, hat low, badge gleaming, eyes cold. "You're harboring another man's wife, Elijah. I'm afraid you'll have to come with me." And behind the sheriff, half the Buckner clan stood with torches. Marlena gasped, and Jesse, who hadn't spoken in weeks, whispered, "Mama, don't let them take him." The jailhouse smelled of sweat, dust, and the dry rot of justice gone stale. Elijah sat behind the bars, his hands bound tighter than necessary, as if the sheriff wanted to make a point. Sheriff Dobbins wasn't a cruel man, not exactly, but he'd been bought by the Buckners years ago, back when he nearly lost his land to tax and drink. Hank Buckner paid that debt and earned himself a dog in uniform. "You shouldn't have taken her," Dobbins muttered without meeting Elijah's eyes. "A man can fight his own wars, but you stirred up a storm with your name on it." Elijah didn't answer. He sat still, shoulders wide beneath his coat, jaw tight as a wound that never healed right. He'd seen war. He'd buried a wife and unborn sons with his own 2 hands. He could sit in silence longer than most men could breathe. "She's not his wife," he finally said. Dobbins glanced back at him. "The deed still says Buckner. Until that changes, you got no say in what goes on out there. She's a prisoner on that land. You know it. I know she married Amos. I know Amos died. And I know you dragged her and that boy off Buckner property like it was some kind of rescue story." Elijah looked at him then. A look that was slow and level, like the way a rattlesnake raises its head before it strikes. "She begged me not to leave her there," he said quietly. Dobbins paused. He didn't answer. He just walked out of the cell room and shut the door behind him, like he didn't want to be part of it anymore. Back at the Hart Ranch, Marlena sat at the kitchen table with her hands curled around Jesse. Her wrists still ached from Hank's grip. Her cheek was yellowing with bruises. But it wasn't the pain that made her tremble. It was the silence. The way Elijah wasn't coming back through that door. The way Jesse kept asking in whispers if the bad men were going to take them away again. She could have run. She thought about it. Packing a bag, slipping out under cover of night, taking the child, and walking until the land swallowed them. But she didn't. She made biscuits. She washed Elijah's clothes and hung them on the line. She sat in his rocking chair on the porch at dusk, eyes trained on the road like it might give him back. 2 days passed. Then someone rode up fast, dust trailing like a comet. It was Clara Sims, the butcher's daughter, who spoke more truth than was good for her. She slid off her horse, breathless. "They're taking him to circuit court in Jackson," she said. "Tomorrow morning. Hank's pushing to have him charged with kidnapping and trespass. Says you bewitched him." Marlena almost laughed. Bewitched. If only it were so easy. That night, she put Jesse to bed in Elijah's room. She let the boy sleep in his shirts, under his heavy quilt that smelled of tobacco and saddle leather. Then she walked outside, barefoot, into the cold moonlight. She went to the barn. She opened the old chest by the loft, the one Elijah never used. Inside it, buried beneath tarps and rusted tools, was his wife's wedding dress. It was simple, cream-colored, worn by time. Marlena stared at it a long moment. Then she folded it, slow and reverent, and tucked it under her arm. By dawn, she was dressed in her Sunday best, hair braided back, and Jesse riding behind her on Elijah's second horse. She rode to Jackson with fire in her blood and salt in her eyes. The courtroom was small, wood-paneled and full of heat. The Buckners sat like crows on a fence, whispering to each other, faces smug. Hank wore a suit that didn't fit right. Clay chewed tobacco even in front of the judge. And Marlena walked straight up the center aisle and said, "Your Honor, I'd like to speak." The room went still. Dobbins shifted uncomfortably. "You're not called to the stand," the judge said. "I don't need to be. I'm not here to testify." The judge raised an eyebrow. She lifted the folded dress from her arms and laid it on the bench. "I'm here to marry the man you're about to punish." Gasps, sharp intakes of breath. Jesse pressed close to her side. Hank jumped to his feet. "This is nonsense!" The judge banged his gavel. "You're out of line, Mr. Buckner." Marlena stepped forward, voice steady. "Elijah Hart didn't take me. I begged him to help me. I had bruises on my ribs, on my thighs. My boy was hiding from his own uncles. This man saved me." She turned to Elijah, still in shackles. "And if I don't stand up for him now, I'll never be worth saving." Again, the judge leaned forward. "Do you solemnly swear you're here of your own will?" "Yes," she said, louder now. "I choose him." He stared at her, old eyes weighing her soul. Then he turned to Elijah. "Do you accept this woman as your bride?" Elijah's eyes softened like spring thaw. "I already did," he said quietly, "the day I saw her bruised and still standing." The judge nodded once. "Then the charges are void. You're her husband now. Ain't no crime in protecting your own." The Buckners stood as one, furious. Hank opened his mouth, but the judge was already pointing toward the door. "You say one more word and I'll have you charged with assault, conspiracy, and godless cowardice." Marlena didn't wait. She crossed the room and took Elijah's face in her hands. "Let's go home," she whispered. They rode back at dusk, quiet. Jesse slept on Elijah's chest, wrapped in his coat. Marlena sat close enough to feel his heartbeat in her shoulder. But when they reached the ranch, the front door was open. Inside, the table was overturned. The rocking chair lay splintered. There was blood on the floor, and scrawled in charcoal across the wall, one word: whore. Marlena stepped back, breath caught in her throat. Elijah stood still, gaze darkening like a storm. Jesse clung tighter to him. And far off, in the hills, a fire flickered against the sky, unnatural, spreading fast. The barn. They had set, the barn ablaze. And somewhere in that fire, the last letters Amos Buckner ever wrote to Marlena, proof of the will and her rightful land, were turning to smoke. She fell to her knees. And Elijah let out a sound that wasn't quite human. The fire ate the barn with a hunger only men could create. It roared into the night, painting the black hills with orange fangs, and the horses screamed from the corral, their eyes wild with the taste of fear in the air. Elijah ran first. No hesitation, just the raw instinct of a man who had lost enough, grabbing the bucket by the well, shouting to Marlena to get Jesse inside. But Marlena didn't move. She stood there frozen, arms around her boy, eyes fixed on the flames where her past was turning to ash, Amos's letters, her last proof of what was hers. Everything she'd once believed would protect her in a town that had already picked sides. She knew what it meant. With those letters gone, the Buckners could return, smug and clean-handed, and claim she was nothing again. "Elijah," she finally screamed. "The fire! They set it to destroy the will." "I know," he shouted, soaked with sweat, throwing water that hissed against the heat. "I know, Malena, but we're still standing, and that means we're not finished." She blinked through the smoke, staring at this man who had come into her life like a storm and refused to let her break. He didn't ask what was in the barn. He didn't scold her for hiding something so important. He just fought to save what little remained: a rake, a saddle, a life. By morning, the barn was black skeletons, charred timber, smoke still curled up from the earth like ghosts rising. Jessie clung to her skirt, and Malena's voice cracked when she spoke. "It's gone. Everything. That will was our only proof." Elijah stood beside her, hands black with soot. "We don't need proof to live free, Malena." "But we do to survive here." He was quiet for a long time. Then he looked toward town. "Then maybe it's time we stop surviving." By midday, he rode into Larkspur alone. Not with fists or rifle, not with vengeance hot in his gut. Just with steady boots, a clear voice, and a name that still meant something in the county. The general store fell silent when he walked in. Hank Buckner was at the counter, leaning close to poor Emery the clerk, puffed up and chuckling about how some folks don't know their place. When he saw Elijah, he froze mid-sentence. "You got some nerve," he spat, "showing your face here after—" Elijah raised a hand, slow. "I'm not here to fight you, Hank." "You calling me a liar?" "No," Elijah said. "I'm calling you a coward." The room tensed. No one moved. "I know what you did," Elijah said, voice low. "You came onto my land in the dark. You lit my barn on fire with a child sleeping 50 feet away. You don't scare me, Hank. But you've crossed a line." "I don't see any badge on you," Hank snarled. "You got no proof. Just big words, and a woman too dumb to know where she belongs." The words landed like stones. But Elijah didn't flinch. "I got a woman who stood up for me when you tried to ruin her. I got a boy who calls me Pa and don't shake when he hears boots anymore. That's proof enough. So here's how it goes now. You come near them again, and I won't call no sheriff. I won't drag you into court. I'll bury you myself. Quiet." He leaned in, slow and dangerous. "And no one in this town will weep for you, Hank." Idao turned and walked out. Not a soul stopped him. Back at the ranch, Marlena scrubbed the floor on her knees, even though Elijah had told her not to bother. She needed to do something with her hands, needed to feel like she could clean the mark. They'd left. Jessie played in the corner, stacking wood chips into towers, humming the first tune she'd heard from him in weeks. "Elijah will fix it," he said softly. She paused. "How do you know?" "Because he doesn't stop when it's hard. He just gets quieter." Her eyes filled with tears. She'd been so many things in her life: a preacher's daughter, a young bride, a quiet widow, a battered woman. She'd been lost, shamed, dismissed, and near broken. But never before had someone risked everything just to see her stand again. When Elijah returned that evening, his knuckles were scraped, but his eyes calm. She poured him water and sat across from him at the table like they'd done it every day for years. "They know now," he said. "Everyone. And no one's on their side anymore." She looked at him, skeptical. "You ever notice," he said, "how people act brave when they think no one's watching, but fall quiet when light gets thrown on their sins?" "They'll come again," she said. "Let them," he replied. "Let them find we've already rebuilt." She tilted her head. "We don't have anything left." "Yes, we do," Elijah said, looking at her, not the room. "We have a marriage. That means something to me. It means something to Jessie. That means we start from that." They sat in silence. And then she asked softly, "Will you take me to the ridge?" So that night, just before the stars blinked, full awake, Elijah saddled the horses, and they rode up the ridge behind the house. From there you could see the entire valley, the trail winding down to town, the river that shimmered when moonlight touched it, and the scattered lights of other homes, flickering like nervous candles. "This is what I used to dream about," she whispered, standing next to him. "Being up high, far enough from the dirt they kept trying to bury me in." "You're not buried," he said. "You're blooming." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and for the first time since Amos's death, she let herself believe she might grow roots again. They stayed there for a long while, but when they came down the ridge, something was wrong. The front door to the ranch house was wide open, and Jesse was gone. Marlena screamed his name into the wind. No answer, just silence. And on the porch, carved into the wood with a blade, were 2 words. "He's ours." The night cracked open with the sound of Marlena's scream. It wasn't the cry of a frightened woman. It was something deeper, something more ancient, as if every pain she'd swallowed had finally broken loose in a single shattering howl. Elijah bolted through the house, turning over chairs, pulling open cupboards, checking closets, shouting Jesse's name until his voice tore ragged. But the house was empty. The back door was ajar, swaying slightly in the wind. Outside, the horses stirred nervously. The scent of tobacco lingered in the air. Marlena stumbled out onto the porch, her hand pressed to the carved words, "He's ours." Her knees buckled. Elijah caught her before she hit the ground. He didn't speak. His jaw was locked tight, his body trembling with a fury he hadn't known since the war. His hands closed around the porch rail like he could crush it down to splinters. "They took him," she whispered. "Oh God, Elijah, they took my baby." "Not for long," he said hoarsely. "I swear to you, Marlena, I will bring him back." "But where? Where would they take him? The Buckner place?" "No," Elijah said. "Too obvious. They know I'd come there. First, Hank's not dumb. He's cruel, but not dumb." Marlena stood, barefoot on the porch, trembling. "He was wearing your shirt. The blue one. He said it made him brave." Elijah closed his eyes. That small detail. It nearly broke him. They saddled the horses within minutes. Marlena refused to stay behind. "He's my son," she said. "I won't sit here waiting for someone to tell me how it ends." They rode hard through the darkness, wind lashing at their faces, the stars blinking coldly above. Elijah's mind raced, piecing together every conversation, every glance from Hank Buckner over the last month. There was only one place Hank would hide something he didn't want found. The old sawmill at Dry Creek, abandoned for years, halfway up the hills and hidden behind bramble. They reached it before sunrise. The building leaned like an old drunk, gray and forgotten, but the scent of smoke drifted from inside. Elijah held a hand up and dismounted. Marlena followed without a word. They crept around the side, boots crunching soft on pine needles. Inside, the voice of Clay Buckner carried, through the rotting walls, "You think he's going to ride in here like some kind of hero? You think he scares us?" Another voice, Jesse's, small and defiant. "My pa's stronger than all of you." Marlena gasped, clapped a hand to her mouth. Her son was alive, and still fighting. Elijah didn't wait. He burst through, the back door like a thunderclap, shotgun raised. Clay reached for his revolver, but he was slow, too slow. Elijah cracked the butt of the gun into his wrist, knocking the pistol clear. Clay hit the floor with a grunt. Hank stood in the corner, knife in hand, eyes wide with disbelief. "Let him go," Elijah said, voice low and deadly. Jesse ran to Marlena, who swept him into her arms, tears spilling freely now. "Boy doesn't belong to you," Hank growled. "No," Elijah said. "He belongs to her, but he calls me Pa now, and I aim to be one." Hank smirked, slow and mean. "You really think anyone in this valley cares what you call yourself? That boy's the last of our line. He's Buckner blood. That makes him ours." Marlena stepped forward. "You don't own blood, Hank. You don't own anyone." But Hank was already moving. He lunged, faster than he looked. Elijah shoved Jesse behind him and met Hank head-on. The knife sliced across his arm, shallow but sharp, and blood welled immediately. Elijah grunted, seized Hank by the collar, and slammed him into the wall so hard the boards shuddered. "You want to finish this?" he growled. "Let's finish it." The fight was short, but brutal. Two men, fueled by opposite fires, one by greed, the other by love. They crashed into broken furniture, fists landing hard. Elijah's knuckles split. Hank's nose broke with a crack. But in the end, it wasn't strength that decided it. It was purpose. It was the years Elijah had lived with grief like a second. Skin, the grave of his wife, the silence of a house with no children, the ache that had lived in his bones for too long. And now, this woman. And her son. He had something worth bleeding for. So when he knocked Hank Buckner unconscious and stood over him, breathing hard and covered in dirt and blood, it wasn't victory. It was protection. It was peace reclaimed. Sheriff Dobbins arrived later, after a ranch hand rode into town with news of the fight. He found Elijah sitting on the porch of the ranch house, bandaged arm in a sling, Jesse curled asleep on his chest. "I told you to stay quiet," Dobbins said, stepping over the broken porch rail. "I tried," Elijah said. "Some things don't listen." Dobbins sighed. "Hank's done. No one's speaking for him now. Whole town's talking. Clay confessed to burning your barn. Hank'll be facing charges before the week is out." "And the land?" Dobbins handed him an envelope. "Judge in Jackson filed a copy of Amos's will last year. Turns out the court clerk had it sealed after the boy's birth. Marlena owns the Buckner land, every acre. Amos signed it over before he died." Elijah looked up, stunned. She never knew. She does now. That night, Marlena stood in the field behind the house, the wind twisting her dress around her legs, hair falling free around her shoulders. Elijah came to her side and didn't say a word for a long time. "I kept waiting to lose it all," she said finally. "Even when we won." "You didn't," he said. "You held on, hard as it was." She looked at him. "What now?" He turned to her fully, took her hand, rough and scarred in his own. "Now we build. Properly this time. Together." She smiled, soft and sure, tears shining in her eyes. And behind them, in the window's warm glow, Jesse watched with a quiet smile, the safety he'd always prayed for now wrapped around him like a home. Not just a roof, but a family. A father who fought, a mother who rose, and a story that began in blood and fire, but ended in love.